Hello, everyone, and welcome to Computer Applications and Business Web Development by Douglas Tondra. In today's lesson, we are going to learn how to use CSS for effective printing purposes. Let's start with how to use CSS for effective printing purposes. If you recall correctly, when we created our document, here I have my website, which is an artificial intelligence website. We created headers, we added an image, we created another header, we added list, and we have two paragraphs that are displayed here. Before we can create CSS for effective printing purposes, we first need to add what is known as CSS to begin. And right now in my page currently, I do not have any type of CSS that currently exists. All right. So the first thing that I'm going to actually need to do is I'm going to need to include CSS on my page to get started. Okay. As you know, CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet, and it really is what allows for me the ability. It really allows me the ability to add color, style, and different types of functionalities to my web page that's going to give it the look and feel that users want to see. Okay. So in order to add my style sheet, the first thing that I need to do is I need to make sure that I have a folder created for that, right? So I'm going to minimize all of this, right? And I'm going to go back to my web development page, right? And here I have web and I have image, okay? So what I need to do now is I need to right click, I need to go to new folder, and I'm going to create a folder named CSS, okay? Inside of this folder, I am going to create two external style sheets, okay? One of them to style my page, as you can see right now, this is what my page looks like. And the other one is to set my page up for effective printing purposes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on File, New, and I'm going to create a new blank page, and I'm going to name this page style.css. So I'm going to go to File, Save As. I'm going to go in my CSS folder, and I'm going to save this one as style.css. Okay, so that is my first page that I will be utilizing for CSS. I'm going to create a new page, and I'm going to go to File, Save As, and I'm going to name this one print.css. Again, I'm creating two style sheets, one for them to simply style my page, and the second one for effective printing purposes. So when I click on the CSS folder, you will notice that I have two CSS documents, one of them to style my page and another one for effective printing purposes. So let's start first with our style.css, okay? One of the key things you need to keep in mind is when you define the style sheet and rule sets, you want to make sure that you link the elements for separate screen and print style. So what I essentially mean by that is, since we created these pages, we need a mechanism or a way to link these two pages together so they can work as one. So in order to do that, what we need to do is we need to go into our header element and specify that. So I'm going to write link rel equals style sheet. Okay. Then I'm going to specify an href equals, and my href is going to be in quotes. And what I'm going to link in here is my style.css. So I'm going to write style.css. All right. And these are the main key things that you want to make sure you do. And I'm going to do the same exact thing for my print.css. Okay. Only difference being is I have to specify, all right, the rule set for printed purposes. Okay. So in this case, the link element for the print style sheet, after I set it up on the screen, I will need to define it in another way. Okay. So another way to define the styles for printing is to add a media query for the print media at the end of the screen style sheet. Then you can code rule sets for printing within the media query. This is similar to coding for a media query for responsive web design. All right, so when we get into responsive web design, we'll be doing the same thing. So what I'm essentially saying here is at the end of print.css, I need to write here media, okay, equals print. So I'm defining it so that way my server knows that that's what the print.css is going to be used for, okay? So now that I have this and it looks pretty good, let's start actually using some CSS on our page. Let's start styling our page a little bit so it can kind of get the functionality that we're looking for it to have, so to speak, okay? So I'm going to go to my style.css, but more importantly, I'm going to go back to my main page. Okay. So here I have the body. Let's start with our header tag. All right. Let's actually start with our body. So I'm going to start my body tag. So the first thing I need to do is I need to define a selector, which is my body. I'm going to put it in curly brace. Open curly braces one, close curly braces the second. Okay. So my body is my selector. Then I'm going to give it a property and then a value. So here I am going to do a font family for my body, okay? And my font family is going to be Times New Roman, okay? And then I will do a sin, let's do a Helvetica, okay? And then let's do a serif. Make sure you put them all in quotes. All right. And then to close it, I am going to close it with what is known as a semicolon. Okay. So your semicolon is very, very important. So you want to make sure that you include that to close the semicolon in your page. Okay. So now that I effectively have this, let's continue with some of our CSS so that way we can make sure it's designed properly. All right. So the next thing that I'm going to do in my body is I am going to do a margin 0 auto, okay? And what I'm essentially saying here is I want my page to be centered, all right? So I want the page that I'm creating to be at the center of my screen. So margin 0 auto puts it on a 0 pixel. Then I'm going to specify a width. And I'm going to make it, let's do 600 pixels. Okay. Let's do a font size. And let's make all of our fonts about 30 pixels, just so we could see what this looks like. So let's take a look at what's happened to our page. Okay. So when I take a look here, you'll notice that nothing's happened. All right. And the reason that nothing's happened is because I forgot to reference my folders. And I purposely did that so you guys can be aware of how important and crucial that this is. Okay. So here we are in my CSS page. All right. So I did not reference it. So I need to go back to my web.html. And in front of style, I need to write CSS slash. All right. Then I can go back. And when I refresh my page, you will notice that I now, okay, have my page working properly. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and you can see that my page is at the center of my screen, right? And as you could tell, right, looks pretty good, right? But when I move it around, it doesn't really allow any level of functionality to happen. And the reason being is because you got to remember, when we created this page, we did not make it responsive. And we'll get into that later on in the course as we continue. So let's go back and let's continue, right? So we specified 30 pixels. Instead of 30 pixels, let's do 30% to see what changes will actually happen in our web page. 30%, refresh, right? And you notice that when I do 30%, right, a lot of changes happen to the words. So it only takes up 30% of my page. So it looks a whole lot smaller. I can't really see what's going on too much. But for now, it's fine because, again, we're just doing this for testing purposes. But I recommend you start with pixels. But for now, I'll make it 40% of my page. Again, just to show you the difference between pixels and percentages, right? Percentages is what we're going to be using for a lot of the design, but we'll leave it alone for now. All right, I'm not going to touch it. So we'll refresh and get everything back to the way that it was. Okay, so now let's do some stuff with our H1. So I'm going to do H1. And I'm going to do a text align for my H1. I'm going to make it center. Okay, I'm going to give it a color. I'm going to give it a color of blue just to get started. And then I'm going to give it a background color. I'm going to make the background color black. All right, and we'll be using hexadecimal as the course goes on, but I just want to get you guys started so you can see. Here I have artificial intelligence, and as you can see, I was able to make changes to my H1. All right, and I gave it this background color. Okay, so now let's make some changes to the image. So to do that, I'm going to write img. All right, and what I'm going to do to the image is I'm going to give it a width. All right. I can specify the width of 100 pixels, right? And I can specify, we'll just do a width for the image right now, all right? Just so you could see what I could do to it, right? And you notice that the image shrinks drastically, but I actually don't want my image to shrink. I want it to take up 100% of the page because that's going to be really the main functionality that my page is going to have. So I would just come in here, instead of 100, I'm going to write 100%. Right. So now when I do that, the image is not going to take up 100% of my page, but 100% within the body because I specified the pixels for the body. So when I refresh my page, let me bring it back down. Okay. You will notice that now my image is taking up 100% of my page, right? So no matter what I do, it's going to stay at that 100%. So that's the difference between pixels and images as we go along. So my machine learning education is perfectly fine, but I'll show you some of the things that we can actually do with that if I wanted to make changes to this element. And part of it is you got to remember, right, these elements are not attached to each other. So if I do anything to the H3 by default, all right, I would have to do it to the LIs for them to move as well. So I'm going to come in here and call on H3. Okay, and I am going to simply give it again a color of, let's say, red. All right, and I'm going to give it a background color of, again, black. All right, just so you guys could see how the changes are happening here. And here is my machine learning, right? And then let's do some stuff to the paragraph. Again, I'm going to call on my P tag. I'm going to close it. And I'm going to give it a color of, let's say, what color can we do? Let's do silver, okay? And then let's do a background color of black, right? And when I refresh it, you'll see that I gave it a background color of silver and a color of black. So that is how I am able to style my sheet, my HTML with an external style sheet. However, we do have a little bit of an issue, right? Because what we need to, so that's how you, what we need to do is to create the page and make sure we can use it for what is known as effective printing purposes. So now how do I style this page and make it usable for effective printing purposes? So to do that, we are going to go to our print.css. And remember that we added a /CSS here, so we need to do the same thing for the print. So I'm going to do CSS /. And all we're doing when we do that, if you recall, is we're referencing this folder. And again, if you can't reference the folder by writing CSS in your computer, you can simply copy the entire directory here and add it, and that should fix your problem that you're running into, okay? So now that I have this and it's all working properly, let me see what will happen if I try to print this page. So if I go to File, Print, you'll notice that when I try to print my page, everything shows, right? This image shows, machine learning shows, deep learning shows, and all my paragraphs show. So when I am designing, okay, CSS for effective printing purposes, you need to keep in mind what elements you want to display to your users when they are trying to print your page, okay? And that is, you first want to make sure that you define clearly what you don't want them to be able to see or do when it comes to printing. So as you can tell, my page really looks the same as it does when I run it in a regular page in the printing format. So one of the things that you're going to have to do when you're designing CSS for effective printing is you want to make sure that your page looks different when a user is trying to print that page. So this is where we need to add some CSS to what is known as our print.css, right? So our style right now is able to style the page. So we know that we added a font family for the body, margin width. For the H1 tag, we made changes. We specified the image width, etc. And we know that we added a media tag in equals print for the print.css page. So now all we have to do when we are talking about printing this page is kind of write the code that we want to appear in our print.css. So the first thing I'm going to do is my H1 tag. I'm going to specify how I want this H1 to look. I'm going to say specify a color of black because I don't want users to waste their color when they're printing. And I'm going to put a text align from artificial intelligence. I'll make it go to the left. And then I'll do a background color of none, right? Because I don't want them to be able to see anything when it comes to the background color. And then for my H3, I will do the same thing, right? I will make it a color of black, right? And then I'll do a background color of none, right? And then I'll do the same thing for my paragraph as well for printing purposes, background color, none as well. And then what I'll do last for printing purposes is I don't want the image to show, right? And I actually want to change the font size of my H1. So let's specify the font size and say we would like the font size to be 150% when users are printing for printing purposes. And I don't want my image to show when I print. So I'm going to do an image and I'm going to write a display of none, all right? And then when I hit save, I am now going to refresh my page and now I'm going to print to see if my print.css took effect. So if I right click and I go to print, you will notice now that my print.css did in fact take effect. I have artificial intelligence at, doesn't look like it took up the 150%, but we can go back and see why that is. I have my machine learning in black, artificial intelligence in black. You notice the background color and everything's gone. And then my paragraph is also in its regular generic color. I didn't specify black, so it looks like it still has the silver, but I can go back and really make those changes if I want to, right? So let's take a look again at what we have here. Okay, let's minimize this, right? So what I essentially was able to do is really specify, let's do 250%, is really specify how I want the page to appear when I'm printing it for printing purposes based on what I am looking for. So I could actually do a color, you would never really want to do that, of red for my paragraphs if I want the paragraphs to appear in red when users are seeking to print my page. You notice that it's red, right? Because I just specified that I want the color to be red for printing purposes. I specified the font for H1 to be 250%, and you can tell the font is 250%. And I was able to make some of those changes that I discussed. However, if I cancel, you'll notice that my regular web page looks very different from my printing web page. So that is how you can create a style sheet or CSS for effective printing purposes. The key thing to remember is to link your style sheet with your hrefs CSS, which is the folder /print CSS, and to specify the media tag equals print, and you shouldn't have any issues when it comes to doing any of that. So that is how you create two style sheets, one for effective printing purposes and one simply for styling your web page. Thank you for watching.